The year was 632 CE. More than 20 years had passed since a moment inside a quiet cave changed the course of history. What began as a single revelation delivered to one man outside the city of Mecca had grown into a movement that reshaped an entire civilization. The early believers had endured persecution, exile, and war. They had been forced to migrate through the desert to the oasis city of Medina. There, against overwhelming odds, they built a new community based on faith, justice, and unity. But the path to that stability had been long and difficult. Battles had tested their survival. Alliances had shifted. Entire tribes had risen against them. Yet slowly, year after year, the message continued to spread. The idols that once filled the sanctuary of the Kaaba were destroyed during the historic conquest of Mecca. The fierce resistance of tribes collapsed after Hunain, and the northern march of Tabuk demonstrated a united Arabian force marching together. For the first time in centuries, the endless tribal conflicts were beginning to fade. Arabia was changing, and now another historic moment was approaching. Prophet Muhammad announced that he would perform the pilgrimage, the journey to the sacred sanctuary in Mecca. The news traveled across the desert with astonishing speed. Messengers carried the announcement from tribe to tribe. Travelers repeated the message in markets. Within weeks, preparations began across the entire peninsula. People understood that this pilgrimage would be different. Many believed this might be the final opportunity to travel beside the messenger of Allah, and so, from every horizon, the caravans began to move. Across the deserts of Arabia, roads that once carried merchants were now filled with pilgrims. Men, women, and families began their journeys toward Mecca. Some came from the mountains of Yemen. Others traveled from the rocky plateaus of Najd. Caravans formed in distant valleys and along coastal trade routes. Each group carried the same purpose: to witness the pilgrimage alongside Prophet Muhammad. By the time they reached Medina, the gathering was extraordinary. Historians estimate that tens of thousands had assembled. The city that once sheltered a small community of refugees was now the center of a massive movement. From Medina, the great caravan departed. The procession stretched across the desert like a moving river. Dust rose as thousands of footsteps crossed the sands. For many, this journey carried deep meaning. Years earlier, they left as exiles. Now they were returning peacefully as a united community. The transformation was remarkable. The tribes that once fought endless wars were now traveling together. The desert that once echoed with battle now carried the quiet rhythm of pilgrimage. Although most of Arabia had embraced Islam, remnants of the old world still remained. For centuries, the tribes had worshipped idols of stone and wood. Each tribe maintained its own sacred symbols for protection and power. But with the spread of Islam, this ancient system of belief was collapsing. Delegations had traveled to Medina during the year of delegations. Tribes across Arabia pledged loyalty and embraced the new faith. Still, a few temples remained. The Prophet sent trusted companions to remove these final symbols of the past. Across the peninsula, the last idols were brought down. Temples were abandoned. It was more than a religious change. It marked the end of an entire era. The age of tribal gods was fading. A new spiritual identity was taking shape. As the pilgrimage approached, Arabia stood on the edge of a historic transformation. For the first time, the people of the desert were united by a single belief. After days of travel across the desert, the great caravan finally approached the sacred valley. The city of Mecca appeared between the surrounding mountains. For many of the companions walking alongside the Prophet, this moment carried powerful memories. Years earlier, they had been driven from this city. They had left behind homes, businesses, and family ties. Yet history had taken a different path. The message of Islam had continued to grow despite every obstacle. As the caravan entered the valley, thousands of voices echoed through the desert with a single declaration: Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. Here I am, O Allah, here I am. The sound of the pilgrim's call spread across the mountains. All wealth, status, and tribal identity were left behind. Every pilgrim walked the same path. At the center of this historic gathering was the messenger of Allah, Prophet Muhammad. He had returned to the city where the mission began. But this journey would be unlike any before it, because this pilgrimage would soon become known in history as the Farewell Pilgrimage. At the heart of Mecca stood the Kaaba, the ancient sanctuary built by the Prophet Ibrahim centuries earlier. For generations, it had been surrounded by idols. But the old world had already begun to disappear. During the conquest of Mecca 2 years earlier, the idols had been destroyed. Now the sanctuary stood purified. As the pilgrims entered the sacred mosque, tens of thousands of believers began the first ritual, tawaf. Wave after wave of pilgrims circled the sacred structure. Each person carried their own story. Some had once fought against the Prophet before embracing Islam, but now they stood together in unity. Only faith remained. The pilgrimage continued with rituals that connected the believers to ancient history. Pilgrims walked between the hills of Safa and Marwa. This journey honored the struggle of Hajar. Centuries earlier, she had run between these same hills searching for water. Her faith was rewarded with the spring of Zamzam. Now, thousands of years later, the pilgrims repeated this journey, walking the same path, remembering the same story. Each step carried meaning. Through these acts, the Prophet was teaching the community how to perform the pilgrimage properly. Many companions observed every action carefully. They knew that this journey might be the last time they would witness the Prophet performing these sacred rites. So they memorized every detail. They understood that future generations would follow this example. The pilgrimage was not only a spiritual journey, it was a lesson that would guide millions. As the days of the pilgrimage continued, the caravan of believers moved toward the wide open plain known as Arafat. This barren valley lies just outside the city of Mecca. On the 9th day of the pilgrimage, the entire gathering traveled there together. The crowd spread across the desert in every direction. Some climbed the gentle slopes of the hill. Others remained in the open plains. Everywhere there were people. Historians estimate that more than 100,000 believers had assembled for the pilgrimage that year. It was the largest gathering of Muslims that had ever taken place. Only a generation earlier, the tribes of Arabia had been divided by war and rivalry. Now those same tribes stood together in the same valley, united by a single faith, united by a single purpose. In the center of this historic gathering stood the messenger of Allah, Prophet Muhammad. From the back of his camel, he prepared to address the enormous crowd before him. The desert fell silent, because everyone present understood that they were about to hear words that would shape the future of their civilization. The Prophet began to speak. His voice carried across the desert through a chain of companions repeating his words so that the message could reach every corner of the gathering. He reminded the people of the sacredness of human life. Just as the city of Mecca is sacred, just as the days of pilgrimage are sacred, so too are the lives and property of believers. No person had the right to harm another unjustly. The old traditions of revenge that once dominated tribal life were now abolished. Blood feuds that had lasted generations were declared finished. The Prophet explained that the era of ignorance, the age known as Jahiliyyah, had come to an end. The system of tribal arrogance and oppression would no longer define society. Justice would replace revenge. Responsibility would replace pride. The message was clear. A new moral order had been established, one built on faith and accountability before God. As the sermon continued, the Prophet delivered one of the most important declarations in the history of Arabia. For centuries, society in the desert had been defined by tribal hierarchy. Lineage and ancestry were treated as measures of human worth, but the Prophet rejected this system completely. He declared to the crowd that all human beings come from the same origin, from Adam and Eve. No Arab is superior to a non-Arab. No white person is superior to a black person, except through righteousness and character. These words echoed across the desert valley. For many listening, the message was revolutionary. The tribal divisions that once defined their world were being replaced with a new identity, the identity of faith, a community that transcended bloodlines and geography, the Ummah. The Prophet continued to deliver guidance to the gathering. He reminded them to treat women with kindness and respect. He warned against injustice and exploitation. He spoke about financial responsibility and the prohibition of interests that harmed the vulnerable. The message emphasized fairness and accountability in every part of life. He then reminded the believers to hold firmly to the teachings that had been revealed. The Quran, the guidance that had shaped the community through years of hardship and struggle. Finally, the Prophet asked the people a question that carried deep meaning for everyone present. Have I delivered the message? The crowd responded with one voice, yes. The valley echoed with their answer. Then the Prophet raised his finger toward the sky and said, "O Allah, bear witness." At that moment, many companions felt something profound. They realized that the mission that began more than 20 years earlier was now complete. As the sermon came to its conclusion, a moment occurred that many companions would remember for the rest of their lives. During the pilgrimage, a verse of the Quran was revealed that signaled the completion of the mission. اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Today I have perfected for you your religion, completed my favor upon you, and have chosen Islam as your religion. For over 2 decades, revelation had guided the community through moments of hardship and triumph. Verses had been revealed during times of persecution in Mecca. Others came during battles, treaties, and migrations. Each revelation brought guidance for the growing Muslim community. But this verse carried a different message. It spoke of completion, of fulfillment. Many companions felt a deep sense of reflection when they heard it. Some even sensed that the life mission of the Prophet was approaching its final chapter. Among them was the companion Umar ibn al-Khattab. Years later, he would recall the moment when this verse was revealed. He understood that if the religion had been perfected, then the earthly mission of the messenger who delivered it was nearing its end. Yet on that day, the valley of Arafat was filled not with sadness, but with gratitude, because the community had witnessed the completion of a message that had changed the course of history. As the sun set over the plain of Arafat, the pilgrims began the next stage of the journey. The great gathering slowly moved toward the valley of Muzdalifah. Torches and campfires illuminated the desert night as thousands of believers rested beneath the open sky. The following morning, the pilgrims continued toward Medina. There they performed another symbolic act of the pilgrimage, the stoning of the pillars that represent the rejection of evil. This ritual commemorates the story of the Prophet Ibrahim resisting the temptations of Satan. Each stone thrown by the pilgrims symbolized a rejection of arrogance, temptation, and wrongdoing. The journey of the pilgrimage was filled with meaning. Every ritual connected the believers to the history of faith, and every moment reminded them of the lessons carried by the prophets who came before. Throughout these events, the companions carefully observed the actions of the Prophet. They memorized the order of the rituals. They watched how he prayed, how he spoke, and how he guided the people. They understood that these actions would become the example followed by generations of Muslims in the centuries to come. After completing the major rites of the pilgrimage, the believers returned once again to the sacred sanctuary. The courtyard of the Kaaba remained filled with pilgrims performing tawaf. Day and night, the flow of believers continued. The sight was extraordinary. Only a few decades earlier, this same sanctuary had been surrounded by idols and tribal rivalries. Now it had become the center of a unified community of believers. During these final days in Mecca, the Prophet continued teaching and guiding the people. He clarified the rituals of the pilgrimage. He reminded them of the principles of justice and compassion, and he encouraged the community to remain united after his time. Many companions spent these moments reflecting on how dramatically their world had changed. They had witnessed the transformation of Arabia within a single generation. A society once divided by tribal warfare had become a community united by faith. And at the center of that transformation stood the messenger of Allah, Prophet Muhammad. Eventually, the pilgrimage came to an end. The believers prepared to leave the sacred city. Caravans began forming once again across the valley. Thousands of travelers would soon return to their homes throughout the Arabian Peninsula, but this journey home felt different, because the companions understood that they had witnessed something historic. They had seen the completion of the message that had reshaped their lives. As the caravan departed the valley of Mecca, many pilgrims carried a deep sense of responsibility. The message they had heard was now entrusted to them. They would carry it to their families, to their tribes, and to future generations. The unity created during the pilgrimage would soon spread far beyond the deserts of Arabia. The farewell pilgrimage marked the final great gathering led by the messenger of Allah. Within a short time after returning to Medina, the life of the Prophet would come to its end. But the message he delivered did not end with him. From the deserts of Arabia, the teachings of Islam would travel across continents, through trade routes, scholarship, and generations of believers. The principles declared during the final sermon would echo throughout history: justice, equality, responsibility, and faith in the one God. What began with a single revelation had grown into a civilization that would influence the world for centuries. And the words spoken on the plain of Arafat would remain among the most powerful messages ever delivered to humanity.